survey shows people no longer believe working hard will lead to a better life. And this caught my attention. I think it's a pretty good headline, but it's also, I've seen this kind of thing in what seems to me like increasing frequencies. I'm seeing this kind of like murmuring. And for me, it's like, yeah, Reddit is like my one vice when it comes to like social media. But I feel like it does help me kind of have the finger on the pulse, because a lot of Reddit stuff is like screenshots from Twitter and yeah, news articles and whatnot. So it's almost like it's a reflection of the zeitgeist, at least of a certain demographic.
Yeah.
So, and yeah, on Reddit, I've seen this kind of thing come up much more often. So yeah, again, it's basically people no longer believe working hard will lead to a better life. So this is based on a study, a 20-year study essentially, called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And yeah, okay. Now, I think this is interesting because it's almost like there's this social contract that is no longer working. And I think people are realizing more and more this is no longer working. Because if you think about it, right, when I was, the story that was told when I was growing up was still the old story of what you need to do is you need to study hard in school so you get good grades so that you can then get a degree, and with a degree you get a good job, and then that's basically you're set. That's what you need, right? You want to have a good job with a good income. That's essentially the goal.
Yeah.
And this is like, I think what's happening in reality is that this approach is deteriorating over time. I think this advice was really good advice for at least 2 or 3 generations of people. And, even further back, it's almost like the advice is, listen, you just got to be, like wear a nice shirt and show up, stand upright and with a firm handshake ask for a job, and they'll give you a job. And it's like you can work your way up from the mailroom to the board of directors, basically, right? And, in brackets, if you're a white male. but
Certainly helps.
Yeah. But and I think even that, I don't know, obviously this is I don't know if this was ever true, like in an exaggerated sense, like I just put it. But it certainly seems like it was more true at one point. That, you could maybe just walk in somewhere and be like, listen, I study hard, I work hard, and they'd give you a job. And that could work. And it's almost like, yeah, you do this and you work hard, you prove your value essentially, and then you'll have a job for life and you'll have a pension and all this kind of stuff, right? I think that's where this story comes from. But it's been deteriorating more and more and more, where now the reality is, in most parts of the world, the reality is, if you get a degree, you will be saddled with debt that might take your entire life to get out of. And there's absolutely no guarantee that you have employment afterwards. And so you might still be working the McDonald's fryer, even though you have a degree. And also, even if you get a job thanks to your degree, there's a little economic trouble, you're immediately fired, right? There's like this entire story that this idea is built on is basically crumbling, and people are noticing.
Well, that's the reason I didn't go to university, because my first job was as a waiter at a big country club full of poncy boffins, like looking down the nose at you kind of thing, really feeling like they're better than you kind of thing. It's like, oh, lovely. But there were people who worked there, specifically one woman that worked there who was in her late 20s. And she had a degree in criminology, that's it. And it baffled me that she was working the same job I was. And because I was like 17 at the time. It was like my first job. Mm-hmm. And she's like, I've got a degree in criminology. Yeah. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing here?
Yeah, that is not supposed to happen.
And she just didn't like that, obviously. She was like, I can't believe I'm here. Yeah. And I'm like, I can't believe you're here. Yeah. Surely you could be doing something with that. Surely there is use for that somewhere.
Yeah. And so let's deconstruct this further, because I think this is where this becomes a problem, right? Like ultimately the promise was, what you do is you work hard and you get a salary, and this is essentially the American dream, right? Where this basically puts you on the ladder to building some level of wealth and freedom. So with your job, you can then eventually afford a house. And then you own this house, which is an asset, which probably appreciates in value. And so if maybe you live there for 10 years or something, and then you want to move somewhere else, you sell that house, you've made a profit. So your wealth has increased. And then, I guess most people just, then it depends on, maybe you spend all of that on another house, right? Depends on where you move. But still, it's like there's at least the potential of your assets are increasing in value, and you go from just being a worker drone to being, to building some real wealth and then, even with a house, maybe you have the house and it's an asset against which you can borrow, and you can then maybe start a business, right? So you can take a loan out against your house, use the loan to start a business. And if that works out, then there's this snowball of independence and financial freedom. Is supposed to start with get an education, work hard. And basically people are just being chopped off at the knees in this process. Because now it's like, yes, get an education, work hard, but now you have so much debt, like forget about it. Forget about all the next steps in this process. It's not going to happen, right? And also the whole situation which in many places where I've lived, this has been the case where, I remember talking to a taxi driver in Barcelona and this is a few years ago, it's probably gotten worse, but then, we just got to talking and he was complaining about the economic situation basically. And I asked, what's the minimum wage around here? It was like, well, about 700 euros. Then I asked, well, what's like the cheapest apartment you can get around here? And it was like about 700 euros. Right? And so it's like that immediately just doesn't work. It's just no way for you to sustain yourself on this salary. And so again, that's part of the story is now you go to the city, that's where the jobs are. Well, apparently you can go to the city to work, but it's not enough to afford to live there anymore. Mm-hmm. And this kind of thing, and of course, it's not that this is happening to everyone. Of course, it's still possible to get a degree and then get a well-paying job and so on, right? There's still good jobs out there. There's still people making a good living and so on. But it's more like it's this slow deterioration where an opportunity that was widely available at some point it's narrowing, and fewer people are actually experiencing the benefit that was initially promised.
Yeah. Well, this is also why people kind of live on the outskirts of a city and then have to commute.
Yeah,
it was the same in London.
Yeah.
People commute from the outskirts or the outer suburbs.
And sometimes ridiculous distances, right?
Yeah.
Just where you're commuting so far, you might as well live in a different city.
One of my old clients used to spend an hour and a half on the tube and then an hour and a half back. 3 hours of a day, she was working. Yeah, and
I'm betting there's people, Americans in the audience, who are chuckling at that.
Yeah,
so it seems a pretty short commute, So that's one of the things that's happening that's interesting. And again, like what I want to get at is like ultimately there was this trust factor, and there was a social contract which basically said if you do this, then you gain financial freedom of some form. You gain some kind of, at least the opportunity to build wealth and the opportunity to start living life on your own terms, right?